Hello, this is Robert M. Price, your host on the Bible Geek Genesis series. This is a course I've taught many, many times over the years and just find it endlessly fascinating. I hope I'm communicating a bit of that fascination to you. If so, it will be the thanks will be due to the text, not me. I'm probably boring you into a coma. It may seem like the course is lasting the lifetime of Methuselah, but let's hope not. We've just come up to the threshold of the flood. We looked at the passage about the sons of God and daughters of men and what it probably originally meant, and it was the favorite Jewish explanation for the origin, or indeed the taint of evil in the world, because you wonder why the whole human race was ripe for destruction in the beginning of the flood story. Now, there were two ancient Hebrew flood stories, and both of them made it into the book of Genesis. We've seen that that shouldn't be too much of a surprise since there's two creation accounts, right? They were placed one after the other, and later rabbis tried to harmonize them with the device of Lilith, etc. But we don't have that kind of presentation of the flood stories. Here we have a single huge flood story that lasts 3 chapters in Genesis, and it's the result of the compiler having stitched and spliced together the earlier 2 stories, one from just like we had with the creation. One is a priestly version, the other is the Yahwister J version, and you're going to see a lot of the same vocabulary. I mean, it comes across even in English. You're going to see a lot of the same theological motifs and so forth, and it's not hard at all. Not only is it not contrived to divide this up into 2, it is so natural and so convincing that this is certainly one of the most convincing proofs of the whole JEDP, source critical hypothesis. So let's take a look first at the J account and see if you can keep up here with your Bible open. I'm reading from the RSV. So starting with Genesis 6:5. Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's about as... Sorry about this, it's my traffic jam, stop and start exegesis. The writer has put every kind of qualifier in there, every single thought, every imagination, non-stop, was nothing but evil all the time. So things pretty bad. 6, and Yahweh was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So Yahweh said, I will blot out man, Adam, whom I have created from the face of the ground, man and beast and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. Notice, though the animals don't seem to have done anything, they're in for it too. Kind of collateral damage, you might say. Notice that element that everything created from the ground is going to be washed right off. That created from the ground business that was so prominent again and again in the Eden story of J. But Noah's an exception. God doesn't want to wipe him away. And as we'll see, it's not like God has anything against animals inherently. He wants to repopulate the world with them, and you know what he's going to do to that end. You jump all the way to chapter 7, verse 1, and you remember, chapters and verses are not original to the text. But 7:1, Then Yahweh said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, kosher, right, ceremonially edible, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the air also, male and female, to keep their kind alive upon the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that Yahweh had commanded him. All right, here's an anachronism. J just naively assumes that everybody kept the kosher laws, even though P is going to realize, no, they were introduced with Moses, so Noah cannot have known them. Therefore, he could not have differentiated between clean and unclean animals. But if you did, that would explain why, as in J's case, you had this differential between 7 pairs of clean animals, kosher ones, and 1 pair of the non-kosher, the unclean, because you couldn't eat the latter. So they'd be safe, presumably, right? The other ones could be eaten. At least we're going to find out that they can be after the story is over. They can eat them, and so they don't have to wait for them all to breed. They have extras for that reason. Or at least they're going to need more breeding stock because people will be eating those. Okay, then you go over, you skip verse 6 and go to 7, verse 7. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days the waters of the flood came upon the earth. You skip down to verse 12. And rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Then you go to the last phrase in verse 16. And Yahweh shut him in. Then continue into verse 17. The flood continued 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. And the waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth. And you jump down to verse 22. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark. Then you skip to chapter 8, verse 2, second half. The rain from the heavens was restrained. Verse 3, and the waters receded from the earth continually. Jump down to verse 6. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made and sent forth a raven, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the earth. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put forth his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark, and the dove came back to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. Jump down to the second half of verse 13. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. Go to verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to Yahweh, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when Yahweh smelled the pleasing odor, Yahweh said in his heart, said to himself, in other words, I will never again curse the ground because of man. Now, what's he referring back to? When he kicked out Adam and Eve and cursed the ground? Or cursing it with a flood? Don't know. I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. Whilst the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Okay, that's the J. Flood story. And I like the way in which God is shown first regretting, ruing, repenting of having created the human beings. He never thought it would come to this. And you begin to wonder if, well, maybe he did think it might come to this, and that was the reason for the prohibition of the tree of knowledge, of carnal knowledge, of procreation in the beginning. If there were a lot of humans, there'd be a lot of trouble. Maybe that was in his mind, and now that this is the aftermath of that, perhaps. So darn many of them, so much mischief. He was sorry made him. Doesn't say he's going to start over, though it implies it again as a kind of an afterthought, because Noah's too good to be destroyed. A trait that doesn't exactly match the drunken spectacle in the next J story of Noah, where he invents wine, but you remember from last time, the original flood's hero was Enoch, not Noah. What the heck? Well, at the end of the story, God is repentant again, as I read it. He seems to admit he kind of flew off the handle there, that even though every thought and imagination of the human heart is corrupt and wicked, and that's not going to change, he will not so drastically react ever again and destroy them, as if perhaps he acted a bit hastily. Interesting. Again, this writer never heard of Thomas Aquinas, never heard of St. Anselm, never heard of any of the classical theologians. Right? There's nothing here about a God who knows the future as he does the past and so on. Right? There's a God who cannot be surprised and so on. This is mythology. Not that that's bad, but I don't happen to believe in the factual nature of mythology, and hope you don't either. Remember last week, I think I quoted some Southern Baptist bigwig that said at the height of their fundamentalist controversy, he didn't know how a man who didn't take literally the first 11 chapters of Genesis had any business in the pulpit. And I said, well, I wonder how a guy that does take them literally has any place outside a padded cell. What is wrong with this, for example? Why couldn't you believe it? People have survived floods before. Well, of course, the problem is the ark shaped like a big footlocker. That's what an ark means, a chest, like a cooler, or like the Ark of the Covenant, right? A big box. It wouldn't be seaworthy. If it were, why would naval vessels take so darn long to catch up with such a design? This is just kind of a daydream. People didn't know actually how to build such a craft at the time. Wouldn't have been seaworthy in a storm like this anyhow. Can you imagine this big flat thing being pitched up by giant waves and then slamming down with all those animals and so on? It would be a horrific, bloody mess. But also imagine they had calm seas the whole way. There's no thought here as to how one would keep the predators and their natural prey apart, how one would feed these animals for so long a time, how one would see to their safety. For instance, to transport giraffes, you'd have to have, as we do today, huge leather slings so they didn't get tossed about. And you'd have to build each kind of compartment with gopher wood or whatever to make it possible for the I mean, they need different slats with different amounts of separation between them, up and down from the floor, etc., etc. They didn't know that. Didn't occur to them, such things. How would Noah have gotten all these creatures? Were there little arks bringing up kangaroos from Australia and penguins from Antarctica? No, God could have just zapped them there with a transporter beam, but then why didn't he just miraculously protect them from the flood? It just becomes ridiculous when you take it literally, which you mustn't do, right? I guess it at least helps us to define the genre, and it is so bafflingly pathetic to realize that people are still over there looking for the Ark of Noah in the Caucasus. That it's just so silly, and even more, it's pernicious when they continue to mount hoaxes claiming they found these things when they haven't. One other thing about Jay here. Jay has the duration of the flood, a mere 61 days. It rains and rains and rains for 40 days, and then gradually recedes for the 3 weeks as Noah is letting out the bird scouts to find out. There isn't a description of the ark except that the word itself means a flat, box-like chest. I don't suppose you really need one, but you're going to get one in the next two stories we look at. And the first of those is the priestly story, placed cheek by jowl with the J story. Oh yeah, I meant to mention, why has the compiler spliced them together and not placed them one after the other? He did that with the creation. Well, he couldn't do it with a flood for one simple reason. Each flood story, being simply a variant of a basic idea of a flood story, ends with God's promise never to flood the earth again. So imagine what it would look like if you have the flood, the ark, Noah, the water subside, God says, okay, I'll never flood the earth again. And then the next verse, God decides, well, I'm sick of those humans, I'm going to flood them out. Well, wait a minute, I thought you just said you wouldn't. Well, they couldn't. Here's one where they realized, yeah, this is not two different events. Let's put them together. You see, had they done it, it would have created the same sort of problem we find in the Gospel of Mark, where in one chapter Jesus says, "Boy, there's a lot of people here, and there's no supermarkets around. I'm just afraid they're going to pass out from hunger. Any of you guys got any food?" And I said, "Well, really, just a couple of rolls and a couple of fish. How are we going to feed this crowd with that?" And so you give it to them. You'll see what happens. And, of course, it's miraculously multiplied. A couple of chapters later, they're out in the middle of nowhere. There's a big crowd. Jesus says, "Gee, I'm afraid they're going to faint away with hunger. No food here. Have any of you guys got anything?" "Well, just a couple of rolls and a couple of fish. How are we going to feed them with that?" "Well, you'll see. Why don't you distribute them?" How can, this reads, it's two different events, but it's the same thing. The miracle of the story is not the multiplication of food, but the stupidity of the disciples. How can they have been that dumb? Well, of course, they weren't. It's just two versions of the same story, but Mark didn't want to leave anybody's favorite out. You know how people are. And here, same thing, only the contradiction was even deadlier. You couldn't have God appearing to break his word, and had enough trouble with that in Eden. So they put in the priestly account, and here it is. You'll notice that it introduces Noah and the problem of wickedness and all that as if we hadn't heard it before, and we hadn't. This version didn't assume you'd be reading it together with the J version. So the priestly flood starts with Genesis 6, verse 9. "These are the generations of Noah." Signature mark of the priestly writer, generations of so-and-so. "Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God, Elohim's sight." Remember before Moses. This writer, the priestly writer, likes to call God by E names, Elohim, El Shaddai. The earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. Notice P's repetitiveness. And 13, God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Now that's interesting. You know, God wasn't planning to destroy the earth in J. This is a much bigger scene here. Verse 14, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its breadth, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark, or one could translate window, and finish it to a cubit above. Set the door of the ark and its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you. There's a favorite priestly phrase we've heard before, and we're going to hear again. I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. 1 pair. Right? No distinction drawn between clean and unclean. That's left for Moses' time. Okay, 20 of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come in to you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Again, excuse me, but it assumes that there are no carnivores. All the animals will eat grain or whatever. Then you jump to chapter 7, verse 6. Here's an age statistic, as we saw in chapter 5. The priestly writer loves this. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. Skip to verse 11, chapter 8, verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were open. We've heard those terms before. The great Tahom, the great deep, that's from the priestly creation account, same writer. The windows of the heavens, that's from the, at least matches the firmament description of the priestly writer. J has nothing of that. Okay, jump to verse 13. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with him entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the cattle according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every bird of every sort. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And they that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. Go to verse 18. The waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily upon the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth, birds, cattle, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm upon the ground, and every man. The water is higher than the top of Mount Everest, or would be if the author had known there was a Mount Everest. There isn't enough water in the world, but you can't blame the ancients for knowing that. And of course, this is the author that says that the Earth is suspended on a great cosmic ocean, so if that had existed, I guess there would have been enough. And that is what he seems to envision. The domed flat Earth is being sundered and broken up, and the water is crushing everything. Now, in fact, if we had enough water to do this and had a world flood, the currents and the tides would be so great, the violence with which the water swirled beneath its surface, that all the water would be deoxygenated and all the ocean life would die of suffocation. That'd be the end of the food chain. Okay, and then 724, the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. That's considerably longer than Jay's flood. 8:1, but God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God made, now I mean, God was sitting around watching TV and he suddenly thought, oh my gosh, Noah. No, of course it means he kept his eye on him. He didn't suddenly remember him. He was watching over him. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heaven were closed. At the end of 150 days, 3b, at the end of 150 days, the waters had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, and the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. Jump down to verse 13. In the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried off from the earth. Jump to 14. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, go forth from the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring forth with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. Remember, that's what God said to the first human beings in the priestly creation account, be fruitful and multiply. So Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. And every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves upon the earth, went forth by families out of the ark. Skip to chapter 9, verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the air, and upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. Of every beast I will require it, and of man. Of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, unless he's a famous football player. For God made man in his own image, and you be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly on the earth, and multiply in it. Well, there's more priestly creation narrative parallel material, right? God made man in his own image. Can you imagine God saying this? It's so obvious, it's just the texture of a story. Then, not done yet, though. Verse 8, then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, behold, I establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will look upon it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth." The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was peopled. Well, all right. This business of God making a covenant with the animals, even, that's interesting. I remember a scene in the movie The Paper Chase, one of my favorites, academic that I am, in which Hart and Ford sneak into the Harvard Law Library in the middle of the night, and they go into this guarded inner room where they have the red set, all the notes of the law professors from when they were students there. And naturally they look up Professor Kingsfield's notes, and Hart, who idolizes Kingsfield, who bears a remarkable resemblance in voice to God when he's spieling off the laws in Exodus, as you'll remember. Mr. Moses. They notice that Kingsfield has a marginal note. Could there be a contract between God and nature? Well, according to this book, there is, right? God made a covenant with nature, with the world, not to destroy it again. And what are the provisions of this? Well, he, on his side, he says that, well, there's the rainbow as the token of his peacemaking. He says, all right, the fight is over. Just to remind me never to flood you out again, here's what I'm going to do. Of course, I'm the storm god, I'm the war god, the lightning bolts are my arrows, I ride the chariot of the clouds into battle and all this, as you see elsewhere in the Bible. And so I fire my arrows from my huge bow. Yahweh himself, Elohim, must have been a giant, and so he had a giant rainbow to fire his arrows from. He says, I'm going to declare a cessation of hostilities between us, so I'm hanging up my war bow in the sky. And the way I've arranged it is, whenever the rain gets too strong, and there's a danger you might get flooded again, I'll make sure that the bow appears to me to remind me, whoops, told him I wouldn't destroy him again, it's time to shut off the faucet, and I'll do it. Now, where did this come from? Well, it is, of course, an etiological story, one of the best. The ancients didn't know what the heck the rainbow was or where it came from, and so their inventive minds came up with something. Or so did modern science through the use of observational technology. The ancients lacked that. So you've just heard what the ancient theory was, according to and we'll see another ancient theory presently. Of course, what we know to be the case is that it is just after the rain has begun to abate that the rainbow appears, because the little raindrops are growing more sparse, and now they're far enough apart that they act as individual prisms and refract the light that is coming through them. And the denseness of the clouds blocked the light before, but now the light can go through them and it breaks up into its color bands. So it happens just after the abating of the rain, not just before, but again, how would the ancients have known that? There's nothing in here about the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is a shame, because I actually found the end of a rainbow once to my utter astonishment, and there wasn't any pot of gold there. I wasn't too surprised at that, though. All right. So there is the priestly account, an actual universal flood, with everything going under and the world itself pretty much being dismantled. And it happens in 150 days or so. Very different. That's how you know you got two stories, but they couldn't leave anything out. Let us take a look at another one. I bet you know this one too, but it's always good to be refreshed on it. The Gilgamesh epics version of the flood. Oh, what a classic this is. This is told us because Gilgamesh's ally Enkidu dies, and he's going to seek the only mortal who became immortal to find out how he did it, so he can perhaps attain a cure for death. And he finally catches up to him. The guy's name is Utnapishtim, and he tells him the story. I will reveal to you a mystery. I will tell you a secret of the gods. I'm reading from the translation of N.K. Sanders, Sandars, the Penguin Books translation. You know the city Shuruppak? It stands on the banks of the Euphrates. That city grew old, and the gods that were in it were old. There was Anu, lord of the firmament, their father, and warrior Enlil, their counselor, and Ninurta, the helper, and Ennugi, watcher over canals, and with him also was Ea. In those days, the world teemed. The people multiplied. So the gods in their hearts were moved to let loose the deluge. But my lord Ea warned me in a dream. He whispered their words to my house of reeds. Reed house, reed house. Wall, O wall, hearken, reed house. Wall, reflect, O man of Shuruppak, son of Ubaratutu. Tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon possessions and look for life. Despise worldly goods and save your soul alive. Kind of sound like the Gospels here. Tear down your house, I say, and build a boat. These are the measurements of the bark as you shall build her. Let her beam equal her length. Let her deck be roofed like the vault that covers the abyss. Then take up into the boat the seed of all living creatures. Well, here are directions for building the ark, just as in the priestly version. Here is a cosmology that fits that of the priestly writer, the abyss, the great ocean depth, and the firmament above. Back to the text. When I have understood, I said to my Lord, behold, what you have commanded I will honor and perform. But how shall I answer the people, the city, the elders? Then Ea opened his mouth and said to me, his servant, tell them this. I have learned that Enlil is wrathful against me. I dare no longer walk in his land nor live in his city. I will go down to the gulf to dwell with Ea, my lord. But on you he will rain down abundance, rare fish and shy wild fowl, a rich harvest tide. In the evening the rider of the storm will bring you wheat in torrents. You notice this is kind of like God sending Moses to talk to Pharaoh with a deceptive spiel, and there's all this talk about quails and wheat and how it's going to backfire on people. In the first light of dawn, all my household gathered round me. The children brought pitch, and the men whatever was necessary. On the 5th day I laid the keel and the ribs, then I made fast the planking. The ground space was 1 acre. Each side of the deck measured 120 cubits, making a square. I built 6 decks below, 7 in all. I divided them into 9 sections with bulkheads between. I drove in wedges where needed. I saw the punt poles and laid in supplies. The carriers brought oil in baskets. I poured pitch into the furnace and asphalt and oil. More oil was consumed in caulking, and more again the master of the boat took into his stores. There's the pitch sealing the ark in Genesis. I slaughtered bullocks for the people, and every day I killed sheep. I gave the shipwrights wine to drink as though it were river water, raw wine and red wine and oil and white wine. There was feasting then as there is at the time of the New Year's festival. I myself anointed my head. On the 7th day, the boat was complete. That's kind of like the 7 days of creation of the priestly author. Then was the launching, full of difficulty. There was shifting of ballast above and below till 2/3 was submerged. I loaded into her all that I had of gold and of living things, my family, my kin, the beasts of the field, both wild and tame, and all the craftsmen. I sent them on board, for the time that Shamash had ordained was already fulfilled, when he said, "In the evening when the rider of the storm sends down the destroying rain, enter the boat and batten her down." That's interesting. Shamash had ordained this and had told him what time to do all this. They kind of shift both the credit for saving the Nepishtim and the blame for the flood from one god to the other here. The time was fulfilled. The evening came. The rider of the storm sent down the rain. I looked out at the weather, and it was terrible. So I too boarded the boat and battened her down. All was now complete, the battening and the caulking, so I handed the tiller to Puzur Amuri, the steersman, with the navigation and the care of the whole boat. With the first light of dawn, a black cloud came from the horizon. It thundered within from where Adad, the lord of the storm, was riding. That would be Yahweh in the Bible, the rider of the storm. In front, over hill and plain, Shulat and Hanish, heralds of the storm, led on. Then the gods of the abyss rose up. Nergal pulled out the dams of the nether waters. Ninurta, the warlord, threw down the dikes, and the 7 judges of hell, the Anunnaki, raised their torches, lighting the land with their livid flame. A stupor of despair went up to heaven when the god of the storm turned daylight to darkness, when he smashed the land like a cup. There's your firmament and your flat earth. The counterpart to Yahweh destroys. This is some great writing. One whole day the tempest raged, gathering fury as it went. It poured over the people like the tides of battle. A man could not see his brother, nor the people be seen from heaven. Even the gods were terrified at the flood. They fled to the highest heaven, the firmament of Anu. They crouched against the walls, cowering like curs. Then Ishtar, the sweet-voiced queen of heaven, cried out like a woman in travail, "Alas, the days of old are turned to dust, because I commanded evil. Why did I command this evil in the council of all the gods? I commanded wars to destroy the people, but are they not my people? For I brought them forth." Now, like the spawn of fish, they float in the ocean. The great gods of heaven and of hell wept. They covered their mouths. For 6 days and 6 nights the winds blew. Torrent and tempest and flood overwhelmed the world. Tempest and flood raged together like warring hosts. When the 7th day dawned, the storm from the south subsided. The sea grew calm. The flood was stilled. I looked at the face of the world, and there was silence. All mankind was turned to clay. The surface of the sea stretched as flat as a rooftop. I opened a hatch, and the light fell on my face. Then I bowed low. I sat down, and I wept. The tears streamed down my face, for on every side was the waste of water. I looked for land in vain, but 14 leagues distant there appeared a mountain, and there the boat grounded. On the mountain of Nisir the boat held fast. She held fast and did not budge. One day she held, and a second day on the mountain of Nisir she held fast and did not budge. A third day and a fourth day she held fast on the mountain and did not budge. A fifth day and a sixth day she held fast on the mountain. When the seventh day dawned, I loosed a dove and let her go. She flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. Then I loosed a swallow, and she flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. I loosed a raven. She saw that the waters had retreated. She ate. She flew around. She cawed, and she did not come back. Then I threw everything open to the four winds. I made a sacrifice and poured out a libation on the mountaintop. 7 and again 7 cauldrons I set up on their stands. I heaped up wood and cane and cedar and myrtle. When the gods smelled the sweet savor, they gathered like flies over the sacrifice. Then at last Ishtar also came. She lifted her necklace with the jewels of heaven that once Anu had made to please her. O you gods here present, by the lapis lazuli round my neck, I shall remember these days as I remember the jewels of my throat. These last days I shall not forget. Let all the gods gather round the sacrifice, except Enlil. He shall not approach this offering, for without reflection he brought the flood. He consigned my people to destruction. Well, that's shifting the blame, ain't it? She was confessing before. When Enlil had come, when he saw the boat, he was wroth and swelled with anger at the gods, the host of heaven. Has any of these mortals escaped? Not one was to have survived the destruction. Then the god of the wells and canals and the Nurta opened his mouth and said to the warrior Enlil, Who is there of the gods that can devise without Ea? It is Ea alone who knows all things. Then Ea opened his mouth and spoke to warrior Enlil, Wisest of the gods, hero Enlil, how could you so senselessly bring down the flood? Lay upon the sinner his sin, lay upon the transgressor his transgression, punish him a little when he breaks loose. Do not drive him too hard, or he perishes. Would that a lion had ravaged mankind rather than the flood. Would that a wolf had ravaged mankind rather than the flood. Would that famine had wasted the world rather than the flood. Would that pestilence had wasted mankind rather than the flood. It was not I that revealed the secret of the gods. The wise man learned it in a dream. Now take your counsel. What shall be done with him? Then Enlil went up into the boat. He took me by the hand and my wife and made us enter the boat and kneeled down on either side, he standing between us. He touched our foreheads to bless us, saying, In time past Utnapishtim was a mortal man. Henceforth he and his wife shall live in the distance at the mouth of the rivers. Thus it was that the gods took me and placed me here to live in the distance at the mouth of the rivers. So that is how Utnapishtim became immortal. We have a parallel with J and the birds let loose to reconnoit the landscape, the seascape. We have a parallel with P in that there are detailed directions given for the ark, and so on. We have the sacrifice at the end, as we do with J. We have the rainbow. This time it's the jeweled necklace of Ishtar rather than the bow of Yahweh, the storm god, though his character is in it too. Obviously, another version of the story, and the parallel would have been complete if they had not replaced Enoch with Noah. This would have been the reason for Enoch being translated to heaven, given immortality, just as Utnapishtim or his Babylonian counterpart Xisuthros were. So, a lot of interesting stuff about that. There is yet one more, with which I will regale you, this a Greek version. Disgusted by the cannibalism of the impious Pelasgians, Almighty Zeus let loose a great flood on earth, meaning to wipe out the whole race of man. But Deucalion, king of Phthia, warned by his father Prometheus the Titan, whom he had visited in the Caucasus, built an ark, victualed it, put food on it, and went aboard with his wife Pyrrha, a daughter of Epimetheus. Then the south wind blew, rain fell, and rivers roared down to the sea, which, rising with astonishing speed, washed away every city of coast and plain, until the entire world was flooded, but for a few mountain tops, and all mortal creatures seemed to have been lost, except Deucalion and Pyrrha. The ark floated for about 9 days, until at last the waters subsided, and it came to rest on Mount Parnassus, or some tell on Mount Etna, or Mount Athos, or Mount Orthrus in Thessaly. It is said that Deucalion was reassured by a dove which he had sent on an exploratory flight. Disembarking in safety, they offered a sacrifice to Father Zeus, the preserver of fugitives, and went down to pray at the goddess Themis' shrine beside the river Cephisus, its roof now draped with seaweed and its altar cold. They pleaded humbly that mankind should be renewed, and Zeus, hearing their voices from afar, sent Hermes to assure them that whatever request they might make would be granted forthwith. Themis appeared in person, saying, "Shroud your heads and throw the bones of your mother behind you." Since Deucalion and Pyrrha had different mothers, both now dead, they decided that the goddess meant Mother Earth, whose bones were rocks lying on the riverbank. Therefore, stooping with shrouded heads, they picked up rocks and threw them over their shoulders. These became either men or women, according as Deucalion or Pyrrha had handled them. Thus mankind was renewed, and ever since a people, Laos, and a stone, Laos, have been much the same word in many languages. Yet the flood proved of little avail, for some Pelasgians who had taken refuge on Mount Parnassus revived their cannibalistic abominations, which had prompted Zeus's vengeance. Well, there's the reconnoitering birds. There's the naming of the mountain on which the ark landed. There's the two survivors. The rest of their family is not on board. They have to resort to creating a new family once they get out on dry land again. There's the initial prayer and sacrifice, the relenting of the gods, the command to repopulate, albeit in a different way, and the way they do it is need I say, an etymological story. Gee, you ever notice that Laos is kind of like Laos? Well, yeah. Do you suppose that's a coincidence? Nah, it couldn't be. The people came from rocks. Pretty good. That's kind of like she shall be called Isha, for she was taken out of Ish. there is more to the Greek flood story. There's a series of fascinating anecdotes about how Zeus and Hermes traveled among men to determine what they were like. What were they worth? Was it worth saving them? And they finally decided, no, guess not. And I want to deal with those stories a bit later because they don't occur at the same point, not before the flood. In Genesis, they occur instead, as you're already thinking, over in chapter 18 with Lot and Abraham, where Yahweh is traveling incognito to find out if what he's heard about Sodom and Gomorrah is true, and if they need a nuking, which he's planning on giving them if they deserve it. So, again, I will wait on that. The parallels are quite fascinating. Okay, so the flood. Again, not all our Genesis stories presuppose a flood. Some of them even seem to contradict it, as when they tell you about Jabal and Jubal and Tubal-Cain, the founders of certain ways of life and skills that continue on into the time of the storyteller, which, of course, they wouldn't have had they been interrupted by a world-destroying flood, especially Tubal-Cain, who is literally supposed to be the father of the nation of Tubal, but he wouldn't be if that nation had been wiped away in the flood. So, we've just got a kind of and I don't mean to sound like I'm criticizing Genesis. Why shouldn't it be this way? It's all the more fascinating. Of course, what I'm saying is it just is unworkable to try to read the story through the crazy lenses of inerrantism. What a crippling way of trying to read the Bible. It's almost as if somebody handed you a Hebrew Bible and said, okay, go get your Greek dictionary. That's not going to do you much good. Well, speaking of populating the earth, we'll get to the Table of Nations, which might best follow this, but first let's take a fast look at the last story of Noah, one which I think does not presuppose the flood, one in which, like the introduction of Noah in chapter 5, presupposes that the big thing Noah accomplished and was remembered for was inventing wine. So this would be Genesis 9:20 and following. Noah was the first tiller of the soil. Let's just forget about Cain. He planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And what the heck? It's his tent. What's the problem, right? Privacy. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and what was he doing there? Was he asking to borrow the keys to the ox or something? Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon both their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, that is Ham, what did he do? Just blabbed to the others? That doesn't quite seem right, because if all he did, that's all that is said that he did, but that resulted in the others doing Noah a favor and covering him up, right? Well, what exactly did he do? Most scholars think something has been omitted here. When he saw what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan." Wait a second. I thought Canaan was the son of Ham. And Canaan wasn't on the scene, was he? Well, again, there's been some sort of a change. It most scholars, just to cut to the chase, figure that Canaan was originally depicted as a fourth son, and he's the one who did whatever the dirty deed was. It wasn't Ham, but the editor has harmonized this with the other stories in which Noah had just the 3 sons. And so I think that is probably the case. Canaan was really supposed to be the youngest son, and whatever was done to Noah, it was Canaan what done it. Okay, back to 24. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed by Yahweh my God be Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave." And then there's a little piece of the priestly genealogy in verse 28. After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. Okay, what is this curse? This seems to be an ethnological story, and in it we have, quote, predicted, unquote, actually legitimized after the fact, the later enslavement of Philistines of Canaanites by both Israelites and Philistines, and the peaceful coexistence of Israelites and Philistines for a brief period. Something also recalled dimly in Judges, where it's possible for Samson, an Israelite, to marry Philistine women. Whenever that was going on, this anticipates it too, in quotes, after the fact. Okay, Canaan, the people, the descendants of Canaan, they will be enslaved by the descendants of Canaan's brothers. It would have been his uncles, right, if he had actually been the son of Ham. Who is Canaan? Well, it's just the same word. It's the Canaanites, the people of Canaan. Then how about Shem? Well, he, as we find out shortly in the next chapter, is the father of the Semites, right, which will include Israel. Canaan will be his slave. God enlarged Japheth. Well, Japheth was a titan worshipped by the Philistines, so he stands for the Philistines. And you know what the Bible depicts? Israel gobbling up Canaan from the east and Philistia from offshore in the west. Whether or not that happened, that was the way they were telling the story already. And so this story is trying to explain and justify the destitute to which the once mighty Canaanites had sunk. Their ancestor asked for it, and now they're all a-paying for it. Well, what exactly did Canaan do? There are 3 edifying possibilities. One centers on this notion of seeing Noah's nakedness uncovered. That appears later on in Leviticus as a euphemism for having sex with somebody in a long list of incest prohibitions, when it's said that one must not uncover the nakedness of mother or sister, daughter, etc. And the suggestion of the inclusion of similar phrases here perhaps suggests that Ham or Canaan had relations with his dad when he didn't know it and sodomized him. That would certainly be disgusting enough. They would have razor-bladed it out of the text because they didn't seem to cut something out. Oh, another possibility was that he had snuck off and had sex with Noah's wife, his own mother, because the Levitical terms to uncover the nakedness of your father, it could be a euphemism for to have sex with your mother. Everybody agrees that's pretty disgusting. So maybe that's what he did. He went off and had sex with Noriah. But I think the most likely possibility is that he castrated Noah in order to become the head of the clan. Now, why on earth would I think this? Well, it's the lurking presence in the story of Japheth, Iapetus in Greek. He was, again, one of the Titans, one of the group of 5 brother Titans. I can never remember them all, but they include Cronus, Creus, Caius, I think, and Iapetus. They get together to dethrone the original Titan, Uranus, the heavens. And the way to do it, they forge a huge sickle and just cut his genitals off. They don't kill him. If they had, there wouldn't be a sky up there. But he's no longer the chief of the gods. The brother who initiates this is Cronus, and he becomes the king of the world, the king of the Titans, and so on, until he gets the same treatment at the hands of his son Zeus later on. Well, the fact that there's a group of brothers, and one of them is named Iapetus, but he is not the one that is the ringleader, it's somebody else, makes me think that this is based on that. This is a barely historicized legend based on the pure myth of the castrating of Uranus by his sons, the Titans. And in fact, I would just bet on that. It's been made into an ethnological story, though. What kind of story was it originally? Why would anybody have told the Greek version? Well, it has to do with a succession of pantheons as new gods are imported or popularized. They're made into the children of old gods. Well, then how did they rule? Well, they had to rebel against them, etc. So I think that's what we have here. In later centuries, some Jews who were slaveholders took this to be a curse on Africans as descendants of Ham, but that really is a stretch in this text. You can almost do it in light of the bogus information given in the next chapter, but it is certain that American slaveholders in the South used this text to legitimize slavery. That's just incredible that people did, but they certainly did. And one has to say that they're not abusing the text completely. They just have the wrong ethnic group. They're not thinking of any sort of Africans. At least this was not. Chapter 10 gives us the Table of Nations. And it is, again, a priestly document, though it's a bit chaotic, and some material seems to have been added to it, sort of like updating an almanac. And let me just indicate how they decided in these genealogies here who is related to whom. They had no way of knowing what the actual relations between ethnic groups was. Of course, they are related. The diffusion of peoples and clans and stuff, but they had no real way of knowing that. So they took the best inference they could and said that people were related if they were trading partners, if they were allies in war, if they were even just juxtaposed geographically, if one had ruled the other. All these different things could be symbolized in terms of blood relations. So it's a kind of a long, coded passage that indicates a lot, if we only could read the whole thing with understanding, about how the ancient groups related, not, however, genetically. I just want to remind you, because it serves here and will again when we get into Abraham and his relations, in ethnological stories, we have people related simply in order to seal the deal between groups in the storyteller's own day. If we are told that some patriarch has 2 heroic sons, well, of course, that's going to mean that the sons symbolize the 2 groups telling the story to make themselves into fictive blood brothers by way of being allies. They posit a common ancestor, usually an eponymous ancestor, that is, an ancestor who bears the same name, though not always. This is common inside and outside of the Bible. We don't just have to look at the Bible. There are plenty of other cases of it, too. Now, let's take a look at this now. Here's a piece of the priestly narrative again in 10:1. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. Who is this? Gomer can be a personal name. It's a female name. Hosea marries a woman named Gomer. How Gomer Pyle got it, I don't know. But Gomer is listed as a country in Ezekiel, as is Magog, the land of Gog. Who is Gog? He is Gyges, king of ancient Lydia over there in Asia Minor. Madai, well, that's a plural, means the Medes, or the Persians and the Medes conquer Babylon. Javan, well, that's the Greeks. Tubal, that's another nation, as is Meshech, both mentioned in Ezekiel 38 as invaders of Israel. And so you see, this is about nations, not individuals, though they're treated as if they were, and that's because they figure that the groups have ancestors with the same name for whom they are named. Verse 3, the sons of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan: Elisha, almost the same as the character's name later, with an extra H on the end. Tarshish, remember that's a place that Jonah was headed for. Hittim, those are the sea peoples, probably including the Philistines and Phoenicians, certainly a plural noun. And Dodanim, plural again. From these the coastland peoples spread. These are the sons of Japheth in their lands, each with his own language, by their families in their nations. Okay, now pick up with the next branch of the family, verse 6. The sons of Ham: Cush, that could be Ethiopia, or it could be a place in Asia Minor, there were two of them. Egypt, Put, which I think is Libya, and Canaan. Now, why would you think the Canaanites and the Egyptians were related? They are not of the same ethnic stock by our markers. But the reason they thought so was Canaan had been governed by Egyptian invaders way back in the 3rd millennium BCE. And so they figured that was enough to posit some relation. So it's a political link, a dead one, that accounts for this. The sons of Cush: Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabdika. Havilah is mentioned as being the place where they have the gold and bdellium and the Garden of Eden directions. The sons of Ramah: Sheba and Dedan. These are Arabian cities mentioned in the Bible elsewhere. Cush became the father of Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. Mighty men, epic heroes like Gilgamesh and Hercules, Samson, Enkidu, perhaps believed to be a demigod. He was a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Is that a J interpolation? Who knows? He is identified by some ancient writers as the same as Orion, the hunter who has a constellation. That would give us some more information about him, but that would indeed fit this, and that he was a mythological hero. And they're saying, you know who we're talking about? The cliche. You come in with a couple of deer over the hood of your car, and they say, wow, he's just like Nimrod. Now, how the name Nimrod became ephemerally in the 80s or 90s to be a synonym for somebody stupid is beyond me. I really don't know how on earth that came about. There's no pun like that here. He's pictured as a great hunter and hero. Not as a bad guy. 10. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, and Akkad, all of them in the land of Shinar, that's the great plain of Iraq. Erech is Uruk, the land where Gilgamesh had been king. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Raisin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. Well, no one guy built all those. He's a kind of a mythical culture hero. Egypt became the father of Ludim, Anamim, Lahabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Kazluhim, whence came the Philistines, and Caphtorim. All those are plural endings. 15. Canaan became the father of Sidon, his firstborn. You know, that's a Philistine city. And Heth and the Jebusites, they were the people that ran Jerusalem before the Hebrews took it over. The Amorites, the Syrians, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Archites, the Sinites, presumably Mount Sinai dwellers, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites spread abroad, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza. That's the same one you're hearing about on the news these days. And in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham by their families, their languages, the lands, and their nations. Is that so? 21. To Shem also, the father of all the children of Aber. Who? Aber, father of Hebrews. That has got to be a false name, mythic character, since Hebrew seems to mean wanderer, not originally a proper name. But anyway, to Shem also, the father of all the children of Aber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem: Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. I'm sorry, Aram is the Syrians, not the Amorites. The Deuteronomic writer loves Amorites instead of Canaanites for some reason. He calls the one the other. The sons of Aram: Uz, remember that's where Job is from, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad became the father of Shelah, and Shelah became the father of Aber. To Aber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, which means division. For in his days the earth was divided. What do they mean by that? Well, they certainly didn't know about continental drift theory, and this is much too late for Gondwana land to be breaking up. They possibly mean that the various clans broke apart and moved away. It might mean that there's a sort of an implied doublet of the Tower of Babel. Everybody split and left. It could possibly mean that in his day irrigation was discovered. Who knows? There's obviously some kind of a tale implicit here, but nobody has, they just haven't really told us enough to know what they meant about this. Okay, and we've reached, I like the ring of that name, Arphaxad. If you're thinking of naming a baby and it's a boy, I would urge you to consider Arphaxad. Eber had two sons. The name of the first was Peleg, for in its day the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan became the father of Almodad, Sheleth, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan, and the territory in which they lived extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem by their families, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, in their nations. And from these, the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. Now we're going to get a different, parallel account of how the peoples spread and developed different languages, if developed is even the right word. The Table of Nations implied that the different languages were functions of the growing differences in ethnicity as marriage habits changed and so on. But this is an entirely different kind, a piece of raw mythology, the famous Tower of Babel, 11:1. Now the whole earth had one language and few words. Well, it didn't in chapter 10, which I mentioned just to say that it's not a contradiction within the same story. It's a sign of a different story. A better one. More fun, anyway. The whole earth had one language and few words. And as men migrated from the east, that is the whole bunch of them, that it clearly implies. This is just a sort of once-upon-a-time introduction. It doesn't presuppose anything we've read so far. And as men migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." Okay, so what's the point? They want a citadel from which they will never have to flee. It sounds a little like Cain saying, my punishment is greater than I can bear. If I'm to be a wanderer, I'll be at the mercy of anybody that finds me. Here, too, we don't want that to happen, so we will build our great fortress, not be scattered about, and make us a name for ourselves. Well, you ought to be famous in whose eyes? Because apparently this is everybody. Okay, maybe they mean posterity, who knows. Notice so far we've got this planning. They say to one another, "Come, let's make bricks, and come, let's build ourselves a city." Well, we're going to have Yahweh rallying his troops with his own plans. In verse 5, Yahweh came down to see this, came down, right? He's literally up in the heaven. Came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And Yahweh said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. Then this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So Yahweh scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there Yahweh Balald confused the language of all the earth. And from there Yahweh scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Who's he talking to? Hey, I got it. Let's do this. Well, we're going to find stuff later in the Bible, like in the prophet Zechariah and the book of Job. He's talking to the heavenly council of the gods. It's exactly parallel to the end of Jay's Eden story, right? Their eyes are open. They know good and evil. They've become like one of us. That's not the editorial we. Yahweh is speaking to the other gods. And here again, they don't want the competition. They want to hamstring the fledgling human race, who turns out to be a good bit more ingenious and resourceful than the gods had imagined. And they don't like it. And so let's nip this thing in the bud while we can. And they do. They magically cause everybody it's like Pentecost, only in reverse. Now nobody can understand anything. They're building the Tower of Babel, and somebody says, "Hey, hand me the staple gun," and so here's that ham sandwich you wanted. What? You're never going to get anything done that way, right? So they said, "Oh, the hell with it. Let's just break up, and I'll teach my kids my language." You just can't maintain this as history if you know anything about languages. There's just no way. Now, why were they building this tower? Well, they wanted fame, again, in their own eyes, I guess. They didn't want to be defenseless and scattered. There's strength in unity. Against whom? Well, who knows? Maybe against the gods, because they were their enemies. But I remember the first time I read this, or remembered reading it. I guess I had not read Genesis yet, or it hadn't stuck with me. I sort of think I had read it in junior high. But I know I was reading that classic of world literature, Salem Kirban's 666, one of the worst written published books you could ever hope to read, and yet not without an element of charm, as I discuss in my chapter in the paperback apocalypse. I read this, just quoted, and I thought, this can't be in the Bible, surely. I mean, is this part of some false Bible that Brother Bartholomew, the Antichrist, is foisting on his minions? I looked it up, and sure enough, it was in there. I said, you're kidding. You mean it actually has God saying, ooh, that human race is much too smart, let's whittle them down to size. Let's cut the nerve and stymie their efforts. It's amazing. And human potential, too much of that stuff, let's get rid of it. Of course, this has to be priestcraft. One cannot imagine a God who could be worried about the capabilities of his creations as if he were Dr. Frankenstein. Now, what has to have happened here is you're reading the anxiety of the priests that wanted to keep the flock stupid and docile. That is sometimes the function of philosophical theology. As one friend of mine said, that if you want to know what the meaning of the doctrine of the Trinity is, why, it's quite simple. The meaning of the Trinity is sit down and shut up. And that's basically what's going on here. So with this so-called explanation of the languages and the ethnicities, well, it's just the opposite of the Table of Nations, right? Which, even though it's organized not genetically, since they had no way of knowing that, it is organized in ways that made sense to them. They at least in there have the idea of a gradual dispersion of ethnicities and languages. Here we've just got, magic stories and scare stories at that. It's fascinating. I'd hate to see it used this way. I'll tell you what reminded me of this story more than anything else in terms of current events. It was a long time ago now, but you and I are lucky, at least I am, I don't know how old you are, to have lived at the thin slice of history that proved to be the greatest moment so far in the history of the human race. That is the moon landing, where human beings actually left the planet of their birth and went to another celestial body. Absolutely unbelievable. And the day or so before it happened, while the lunar module was making its way up there, they were interviewing all sorts of people, and there was one group of people from a church that said, oh, they'll never make it. God's hand will swat that rocket from the sky. Why? Well, because the Bible says the heavens are the Lord's, the earth He has given to the sons of men. Well, they were a little wrong, I'd say, but they were right in sync with whoever told the story of the tree of knowledge in Genesis 2 and 3 and the story of the Tower of Babel here in chapter 11. That is the idea. Let's clip the wings of human potential and human imagination. We wouldn't want people thinking for themselves, because if they did, there's nothing they could come up with that they couldn't somehow do. Well, of course, you wanted to do that, don't you? Except when it comes to cloning, right? I guess we're still in the Tower of Babel mood. A couple other things about the story. The rabbis later came up with the idea that Nimrod had built the tower. Well, they did have the right place. Nimrod is said to have been the king or the founder of Babel, but he's certainly not mentioned in the story. It's said that this is a Promethean attempt to usurp the prerogatives of the gods, or to seek safety from the gods in case they should flood the world again, or infidelity to God because He had promised He wouldn't flood it and they didn't trust Him and said, well, maybe He will, let's not take the chance, let's build this thing high up. None of that is said. It's because, of course, all those explanations want to cover up the polytheism of the narrative and the insecurity of the gods there depicted. That's what's going on there. Why the confusion element? How does all this Babel, Belial, Shinar stuff fit together? We're on the plain of Shinar. That is where Babylon was built and still is. And you could pronounce it, you could render it either Babylon or without the suffix Babel. The whole civilization, the city, you could call Babel, and some did in the ancient world. So what they're trying to do here is, for one thing, it's an etiological story to explain the origin of different languages, which is kind of weird when you think about it. We've all got the same vocal equipment, except for the lead singer of Creedence Clearwater Revival, apparently. But we have different languages. Why? Well, here's an ingenious attempt to explain that. And then also the name. Babel actually means gate of God. You know how Bethel means house of God. Well, Babel, gate of God. And the reason for that is they had hilltop altars where one would contact the gods by sacrificing to them. One would go to the gate of heaven. And really the same thing as house of God. Jacob is at no great elevation when he finds that having slept on a rock to elevate his head, that since he dreamed of Yahweh must be in the rock. Hence, the rock, the pillar which he set up and anointed, must be the house of God. Well, here, they went to hilltop shrines to meet with the gods. When the Babylonians moved to the plain of Shinar, where there are no natural mountains, they still wanted to worship high up, so they built artificial ones. These are the famous ziggurats, right, like a kind of a stepped pyramid. And they would have altars at the top. And the priests would go up the stairs, make the offering, of course, as they used to climb up the hill. Well, this is what the Tower of Babel is. It's a ruined ziggurat. In fact, archaeologists think they found the one in question, but it was one that was seen by the priestly writers in Babylon during the exile. And they said, wow, it looks unfinished. Why would that be? Well, it wasn't unfinished, it was old and it had collapsed and hadn't been repaired. But they figured, they must have left off building it. Why would they have done that? Perhaps God stopped them. and so forth. Well, why call it Babel? Well, they may have known, and must have known good and well what that meant, but the gods in view were pagan gods, so they didn't actually want to call it the gate of God. Let's ridicule it and call it Balal, which sounds kind of similar, but it's a nasty pun. It's the land of confusion, if you've ever seen that video. It's the tower of confusion. And gee, maybe God punished the hubris involved in building this thing by confusing the people or their speech. And so the story is made the bearer of many pre-scientific guesses at various things. The origin of this ruined ziggurat, the origin of different languages, etc. A fascinating story with a lot of resonances in it, even though old Nimrod had nothing to do with it. It's just amazing to me how people cannot tell the difference between what the Bible says and doesn't say. In Josephus's great work, The Antiquities of the Jews, he says, I'm going to start by spelling out the great stories of Scripture, but I'm not going to take anything away or add anything. I'll just give it to you straight. And, of course, he does anything but. And when you get to this story, for example, what does he do? But he has King Nimrod building a tower so they can avoid the flood. Where do you get this? Right? It's not in Genesis. I remember seeing something that a bunch of Adventists put together they did it for CBS years ago called Ancient Secrets of the Bible, and they're talking about the Tower of Babel and why it fell. Everything about the thing is fiction and not biblical fiction. There's not enough of a story to tell straight, so they figured they didn't want to just tell it straight, so they dramatized it. And they got the evil King Nimrod, and he's doing bad stuff of some kind, and the weather's getting rough, and he consults seers to find out what's the matter, and of course they're praying to pagan gods who aren't giving any answers, and so they sacrifice babies and to appease the gods, but that doesn't work, so sacrifice more of them just to show that Nimrod's no damn good and everybody in the tower deserves it. Is this the Bible or the Towering Inferno? You're trying to prove the Bible is accurate? What Bible are you talking about? Not the one in the hotel room, that's for sure. Some other kind of comic book or some Hammer Films version of the Bible, I suppose. It's very much like Pat Robertson saying how you got to believe in that Bible, but now let's throw it out the window and read the Living Bible instead. Well, there's one other part of the Noah thing, I guess I should tell you, that didn't make it into the Bible, maybe much later than the Bible, who knows, but there is this one real interesting Nag Hammadi text called The Thought of Noriah, and Noah's wife is mentioned by name. It's Noriah, and she doesn't like, I think it's Sabaoth, a false god, has alerted Noah to save himself from the flood, and she doesn't like this, so she shoots forth from her mouth a great solar flare and consumes the thing. But he builds another one, and didn't do much good, but